Well, I love that Chinese symbol that has crisis being an opportunity, and that's been validated over and over in biological evolution. Every time there's a major disaster, you know, wonderful new things evolve out of it. Part of my optimism derives from the fact that the planet is more powerful than we are, and that all of these designs and things for taking over the world, what I call the last gasp of the empire building era. You know, patriarchal empire building is now in a race between Western corporations and China, who's going to control the world. And I believe that our planet will wash away all their best laid plans.
Okay, Victor, I would say today for me the unlimited capacity of our interconnectedness. I really believe that once we let go of having to make something happen and we allow the unfolding of something, it's incredible and magical and impossibly beautiful. So I have deep faith in that, and it makes me very optimistic.
It's Victor Burton here, and welcome to the Centre for Optimism, and more importantly, the Optimist Heart. The creation of Caroline Ward every week seems to become more interesting and more inspiring. And today I am just, my heart is full to welcome you here, Elisabet, from the United States.
Thank you, from Honolulu.
Very
from
beautiful.
Hawaii.
So many Australians love Hawaii. And in fact, we actually had some Australians move to Hawaii. Tammy Ruse, who was on an earlier program, has actually moved there. So we'll have to introduce you. And Caroline, welcome. As always, an inspiration. And today you've joined the Circular Economy on Spectacles. I
have indeed. As I was saying earlier, I was clearing up a few things and I forgot that I had these, and I went, oh, I think I can match Victor in his orange specs. So these are retro that I bought online, secondhand. They're about 40 years old. So that's cool, isn't it?
So we're joining you in the circular economy, Elisabet. So the first question we always ask at the Centre for Optimism, Elisabet, is what makes you optimistic? Elisabet, what makes you optimistic?
I guess it's being an evolution biologist and knowing that lots of species have gone through their own crises before us, and they all managed to do it. And we've done it a number of times as humans already at smaller scales, primarily in indigenous societies. So this is the first time we have to do this thing at a global scale. And since it's worked in every other situation before, why not now?
It's beautiful, and I've seen so many different ways you've expressed it, but you also look at opportunity. You know, I think the thing that really is inspired is you are in fact, the professor of opportunity, I think, aren't you?
Well, I love that Chinese symbol that has crisis being an opportunity, and that's been validated over and over in biological evolution. Every time there's a major disaster, you know, wonderful new things evolve out of it. So
may I throw to you, Caroline?
Oh, you certainly may, Victor.
And over to you.
Thank you. So one of the other things that makes me very optimistic and kind of big in the heart is that in this Optimist Heart journey, I've been working very, very much by intuition about who will be the next guest, this unfolding. And sometimes I'm embarrassed because it's only like at Wednesday, I go, oh, and this week it was Wednesday, I said, oh, it's Elisabet this week. I thought, how is Elisabet going to be free with such a short kind of time frame? And the same with Tamar the week before. And I went, okay, that's it. I'm asking her anyway. And she said, yeah, I think that's something I could do. And I went, wow, I love it. I love it because I think there must be beyond my planning mind, which is, you know, limited, there must be some very beautiful unfolding in the way that our guests show up. So it's a very great thank you and a very warm welcome, Elisabet, to have you here with us this morning. And you, well, it's just after midday, I think, in Honolulu at the moment.
Right.
Yeah. So
mahalo.
yeah.
Mahalo and aloha mai kako is hello to everyone in Hawaiian.
And so how long have you been in Hawaii now?
About 5.5 years.
And before that you were in Greece, no? You were living in...
Well, no, from Greece I went to California, and then I went back to my beloved Mid-Earth Sea, the Mediterranean, to live in Spain. So I was on the island of Mallorca in Spain when I got the spirit, well, I actually got the spirit call to move to Hawaii in Scotland while I was at Findorn. But when spirit says move, I trust, and even when I have no means to do so, I just say, make it possible then. If you want me to go, I'll go, just make it possible. And then everything falls into place and I end up where I'm told to go.
Oh, I'm going to come totally back to that, because I think that that's just, you're such a fine example of how a rich life can be woven by surrender to that. So I definitely want to come back to that. I want to start because everyone who's here today in our beautiful community, which we have we started during lockdown, and everyone who's here, I would say, has read the material that we sent out about you and we put on the website, which, you know, chronologues a range of different beautiful, eclectic happenings and offerings through your life as a scientist. But scientist is way too tiny a label to put to you, you know? And I want to ask you, first of all, tell us what you were like as a child.
Oh, well, I had the good fortune to grow up in the countryside in the Hudson River Valley of New York State, where I was free to walk in the woods and on the riverbanks and commune with the trees and the birds and the animals and everything. And no one had told me, no one had put things in boxes like this is for children, this is for grown-ups, and this is science, and this is religion. And so my mind was free to wander up into trees that were too high to climb if I wanted to be with a woodpecker. Or so it was just a wonderful natural immersion. I was born as an immersion into the natural biological world. And so I early started wondering, who are we people? What are we doing here? How did we get here and where are we headed? Not having a clue that those were the great philosophical questions of the ages, right?
So that's really interesting, isn't it? That if you're allowed to be and be with the whole, those kind of inquiries naturally emerge.
Yes, thank you for that.
Yeah,
that's so true.
Beautiful. And so then, were you there through your adolescence as well and through all your schooling? Did you always hold on to that connection with the natural world?
No, I figured out that I should become a biologist, but my parents said that science was a boys' thing and not for girls. And remember, I'm 85, right? So so they pushed me to go to art school, but when I was 15, I won a 4-year room, board, and tuition scholarship to the university of my choice in New York State. So so at least I got to go to art school in a big university. And it happened that Oren Lyons, the best indigenous spokesman in America, was also in that same art school before he became an Indian chief and before I became a scientist. So interesting, because I grew up in Haudenosaunee territory, which I only later discovered, had evolved the only real democracy I know of ever in the world. To this day, I don't think anyone has put together and practiced a real democracy the way the Haudenosaunee Indians did. And there were the founding fathers of the United States right on their territory, not getting it, except for the little bits they took from their constitution, which was called the Great Law of Peace.
Wow.
And it was the checks and balances tripartite government that they took, but they left out nature, women, children, the future, all of those things.
Elisabet, can you speak a little more about that when you say the only true democracy? Can you give us an insight into what that means?
Yes, I mean, I find this absolutely fascinating. If you study their Great Law of Peace, they had put together 6 warring nations, 5 first and then a 6th that came in. And under this Great Law of Peace, and their symbol is a great pine tree under which the weapons of war have been buried down under the roots of it.
Wow.
And so they had parliaments, and if a man wanted to declare war, he had to put on a skirt and carry a corn grinding bowl into the parliament to remind everyone what war does to women and children and the food supply. And therefore, apparently, they had no wars for 1,000 years. not necessarily therefore, but the fact that they took all those things into consideration is what helped to keep them peaceful.
Mm.
And so everyone's voice was heard. They did not do voting. Now, both ancient Greece and we in the modern world use voting for decision making, but no indigenous culture I know ever did. They operated on consensus building. And the important thing about consensus building is that every level, from the individual to the whole community, has to be taken into consideration. So compromises are made, negotiations happen exactly in the way that in our own bodies, which are beautiful democracies, every cell has to negotiate with its own organ, and that organ with the organ system, and that organ system with the other organ systems, and all of them with the whole body. This holarchy of embedded levels is always, the whole thing has to work. Every level has to thrive. So we think that we can build, a healthy global economy at the expense of local economies. That can never work, right?
Mm.
Every level of a system has to work.
Wow, I mean, we could just spend the entire week going deeper into what you've just talked about now. I love this because often I find that people are frightened of consensus because they can't control the outcome, and it takes a long time, and you have to listen to a lot of people, blah, 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 and yet this kind of hit for expediency and intelligent expediency, which is, a misnomer anyway, but we miss the weaving of the underbelly that keeps things generative and regenerative over time. We miss the beauty and the richness by kind of cutting out all of the permutations of things we don't want to really listen to, but are really important.
Yes, absolutely. Just today I got an email in which there was some comment by Melinda Gates, who said, we really didn't consider the economic consequences of what we were doing in this COVID crisis when they were funding so much of what was going on.
Yeah.
She actually came out and said, we really didn't think it through,
In the sense that we should have, or that was the last thing on the agenda?
I haven't had time to follow up on it because I just got the email before we had this conversation. It's an example of not thinking holistically, not taking everything into account. And you know, another aspect of democracy, if you are going to have a two-party system with voting, is that in nature is profoundly conservative with the things that go well, to protect them. And it gets radically creative with the things that don't work. So this is not something you vote on every 4 years to do one or the other. It must be a collaborative agreement, a division of labor. Then maybe even a voting democracy would work if you understood the two parties not as adversaries, but as collaborators, necessary collaborators.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember speaking to the deputy leader of one of our two parties about 20 years ago. And, you know, in my idealism, proposing exactly this, I said, it doesn't make any sense that one party is the opposition. Because if you're the opposition, you have to oppose everything rather than being collaborators or custodians of, you know, the voice of the people or something. But to reform a government, I mean, of course, idealistic and, you know, not taken up, Elisabet, but yeah, I agree. Wonderful. So I think one of the things that reminded me, apart from our time when I was with you in Hokkaido, when you set up this extraordinary symposium, and you did 2 symposia, I know, one in Kuala Lumpur as well. And in Hokkaido was, you know, an amazing group of scientists, but from different aspects of science. Even I forget his name, but the Japanese man who was a mathematician, philosophical, the philosophy of mathematics, and then there was the or the philosophy of science, and the mathematician from Kuala Lumpur, and then the young, wild Samantha from England, and Enoe Texia from Venezuela, I think,
Yes.
Social scientist, and then of course the amazing Nobel physicist, Nobel Prize-winning physicist from England. So you had this extraordinary collection of people. Can you share with us what was your intention in bringing those groups together? Because it was pretty radical and necessary and profound.
Yes, well, the idea was that I had become very aware of what was called the paradigm shift in science, where it really started with quantum physics. The founders of quantum physics had all admitted publicly in various writings of theirs that they had had to look to the Vedic worldview of India to explain the results they got in their experiments, because the science that they had been taught couldn't help them explain what they found when they looked through matter, basically into consciousness, right? So there were many leading edge scientists, and I count myself among those in the fields of physics and biology and other aspects of science, who were shifting to a consciousness-based worldview rather than a material worldview. And so this was all about the foundational assumptions on which science is built, because no one can make a scientific theory and test that theory if they don't have some concept of what is this universe we're studying, right? So all of science rests on the belief system of the founding fathers of that science. And I don't know many sciences that were founded by women, so I legitimately call them the founding fathers, right? So what I wanted to do in that symposium was to get together the scientists who had been trained in classical Newtonian science, but had made that paradigm shift, to get together and write out what were the assumptions they were trained in and what were the new assumptions that they had shifted to. And then in the middle of that symposium, I had an epiphany one morning when, before I woke up, as you remember, we're in this like 7-star hotel over a beautiful misty Japanese lake with forested islands in it, and it's so gorgeous, and we have big picture window rooms. This is a hotel where the G7 had just met, right? And that we were gifted. And and suddenly the spirit of Giordano Bruno came to me, and I recognized him because I always had been fascinated that Bruno, so far back, had at the beginning of the Renaissance, had already understood an omnicentric universe before we even had the Earth-centered, the solar-centered, right, perspective. We went from Earth-centered to solar-centered, and Bruno had already skipped that step and recognized that everything everywhere is the center of the universe. So somehow magically that gave me this epiphany, and I came down that morning and said to you all, we cannot adopt a conquest model of one worldview, scientific worldview, taking over another, right? This is not the paradigm shift in the Kuhnian sense where we replace one with the other. Why can't we see these as two separate sciences, the Vedic science view and the Western material science view? And that's why the next symposium was in Islam, to look at what's the Islamic science point of view, right? So, so we ended up with a different, of course, as you remember, when people wrote these out, we ended up with hundreds of statements on each side. And then we had to winnow those down and down and down to getting a very simplified worldview for each of these possible sciences. And so my dream was always to do Taoist science in China next. And 2 years ago, I actually had a sponsor, but she then had to pull out because she lost all her money. And to look at all the indigenous sciences, like that Haudenosaunee scientific worldview, and the ones I studied in by going to Peru to live in the Andean mountains and see how their science had worked to produce the origins of half the food eaten in the world today that was developed there very scientifically. And so I'm fascinated by this idea that different human cultures see the universe in different ways. And I really ended up with the keyboard model. I don't know if that's one of the things that you sent people before.
No. If you could expand on that, that would be great.
Oh, okay. Well, all scientists seem to agree that the universe is made of vibrations. It seems to be the one thing that pulls them all together, that the universe is cosmic sound at an even higher vibration than cosmic light, and that everything is vibration. So I said, let's use a keyboard, a piano keyboard, as a metaphor for the different vibrations lined up, right? Now imagine that keyboard to be infinitely long in both directions. It sails off into the universe, right? Yeah. So the low keys at the left end when you sit at a keyboard are the matter the slow, heavy matter vibrations. And then as you move up the keyboard, you get into electromagnetic energy. And this is where Western science started out, at the low key end of the keyboard. And they moved up into the energy section there. And then Einstein came along and showed, oh, matter is energy, energy is matter, E = mc squared. You can transpose the music up and down the keyboard. And then Western science gets stuck because one of its assumptions is that in a material world, what's real is measurable by physical material instruments. And they don't have instruments to go beyond electromagnetic energy, just up to 0 point energy is the highest they can reach. Now, the other sciences, especially all the Eastern ones, started at the other end of the keyboard in the highest vibrations of cosmic consciousness, right? And they just slow down the vibrations to get to electromagnetic energy and matter. So they can derive the whole keyboard from where they started, while Western science gets stuck being unable to measure the non-material aspects. So I say to people, you know, you're not a body with a soul, you're a body, mind, soul. You're essentially a soul that has materialized, that has slid itself to more of the keyboard. And one of the beauties of being in a physical body is that from a physical body, you can reach the whole keyboard. Even if Western science can't do it, you as an individual can, simply by recognizing that you are all of those, the entire universe of vibrations.
Wow, that is such a glorious metaphor. It really is, Elisabet. I love it. And tell me, do you think that we can do that if we're not living in connection with the natural world? Do you think it's possible to be in our kind of normal daily lives of, you know?
Yeah, well, we've done this strange thing as humans to kind of box ourselves off from who we are, right? So we don't talk to trees and plants, and you know, trees have more senses than humans. They have at least a dozen beyond our 5. They see, hear, feel, touch, smell, but they also have all these other detectors of minute traces of elements through their roots or in the atmosphere, and radiation, all the, you know, gazillion other ways of perceiving, and they've been around in linear time longer than we have, a lot longer. So we cut ourselves off from so much of the full keyboard. You know, at every level of the keyboard, you play chords, you play rich chords, and when you cut yourself off for something as vital as your own source in physical reality, you know, you get a very limited kind of clinky little keyboard rather than a big rich organ, right?
Right. Beautiful, beautiful.
And you know, the other thing that the keyboard does so well is we don't have to integrate science and spirituality. The problem is, why did we take them apart?
Yeah. I think I was going to ask, well, bring that to the conversation anyway, this idea that we've separated. And I think that's, you know, if historically we can look at where, you know, religion appropriated, institutionalized hierarchical religion of power and control, appropriated spirituality and as control rather than, you know, it being part of the natural world. And so then we had to compartmentalize and split off, and the mysticism was something separate. And so I think in these new sciences, what I can see and feel is that there is a reintegration. Everything's coming back to wholeness. And even things like what's happened this year with COVID is bringing us back to this interconnectedness of having to see things as part of a whole system, or seeing the whole system.
Yes, you know, the keyboard model metaphor comes in handy here because there are at least 2 basic ways to look at the COVID crisis. One from the low end of the keyboard and one from the high end of the keyboard, right?
Yeah.
From the low end of the keyboard, you deal with viruses and tests and respirators and hospitals and caregivers and all those things, right? And from the other end of the keyboard, you can see that maybe we humans, finally having recognized how damaging we've been on the planet, put ourselves into a retreat, you know, called a fever that, just as we are giving Earth a fever, we're now going to give ourselves a bad fever, right? And find cause to restrain ourselves, to get back. And within weeks, nature responded with blue skies and greater health, and the animals came out, and Wonderful, like nature did so well with her humans in lockup, right?
Yeah.
And then we elevated caregivers to heroism, which was another good outcome from that perspective. Okay, it's not about warriors and politicians, it's about caregiving. It's about caring and sharing as an economy. And so those were beautiful outcomes. But now, from my perspective as an evolution biologist, the strangest thing to me is that every healthcare professional in the world knows that the best defense against this new disease and many other diseases is a healthy immune system.
Yeah.
And while it took us 30 years to after we invented the anti-life antibiotic drugs, it took us 30 years to recognize that all bacteria aren't evil germs, and that in fact, very few of them cause us problems, and that most of them are absolutely indispensable allies living it on our skins and in our guts. And so a healthy immune system meant you had to feed your gut bacteria healthy food, or it could not run your immune system, right?
Yeah.
That is now known across the board in the healthcare industries, right? But we don't have a healthcare industry. We have a sick care industry that's highly, highly profitable. So we now have the same company. We can point to one company called Bayer, which swallowed up Monsanto, so it's all one company. They make huge profits poisoning the entire food supply by spraying the antibiotic chemicals onto the veggies and grains and then stuffing them and as antibiotic meds into the animals in these horrible feedlots. And believe me, the veggies are grown under feedlot conditions too. They are just as deprived and chemicalized and tortured, you know, as the animals are. So I'm a great crusader for everybody who wants healthy food to stop fighting each other on whether you're going to be a vegan or a paleo, right? But just to get together and say healthy food, please, whichever one we choose. And so the solution to the COVID crisis in the long run is to stop the pharmaceutical companies from double profits on making money by poisoning the food supply and then by selling us medications and vaccines because we've lost our immune systems. That is just insane in the long run. And so what we should be crusading for, and it's so non-controversial, is healthy food, please.
Yeah.
Is that too much to ask?
Well, I think not, but I think what it comes to is that we've, in so many ways in our lives, we've given our power of life and living over to other authorities. And even the very act of creating our own food systems, you know, we don't grow our own food. So people are starting to do that now, to say, well, actually, I think I need to grow my own veggies. And that's a very powerful thing to do, because you get to be in charge then of what you're ingesting. I remember, I'll just tell you this story, and you know, Chile, you've been there a number of times, I think, and certainly South America. We have a friend in Chile who's a beautiful woman who set up a school in a very poor area, and the school is set up. The kids get, you know, a good meal per day, which they wouldn't otherwise get, and they learn about agriculture so that they can be the wisdom keepers for their families, and they learn the depths of agriculture and also with animals, but in very kind of caring kinds of ways. Anyway, she was called to a local meeting, and it was a sales pitch from Bayer, you know, that were basically selling their toxic products. And she stood up, she said, I'm sorry, everybody needs to know that this is not a good thing. And she's a very conscious woman, very beautiful Buddhism practice. And she really laid it on the ground and tried to you know, bring people on board. The next day, she heard this incredible sort of screaming, and the kids during their playtime were out, and there's about 100 kids out playing in it was on a farm type area, and all of a sudden over the playground came an airplane dispensing these toxic chemicals over the top of the kids. And it was a total political backlash. And of course, you know, there's just all the teachers racing around to wash the kids, get them in other clothes. You know, it was just horrendous. So it is a very challenging moment. It's like the big movies of, you know, the showdown between good and evil. You know, there is this showdown kind of thing happening at the moment, I think. But I remember when I last saw you in Miami at the Newfield, it was a Newfield conference we were both keynoting at, and it was just it was 2009, and the GFC was kind of still causing, you know, fairly significant ripples. And there are about 300 coaches, and you came out and you opened your keynote and you said, who's concerned? And everybody put their hands up. And you said, but why? You're all here as transformation agents. That's what you're committed to. We're creating this. Whatever the systems that are breaking down is not separate or random. We are co-creating a new world. And this transformation, which is a little painful, but it's us. And you were just full of bright light and joy. And rather than people who were terrified became joyful. And I thought, this is phenomenal, to tell the story of transformation from an empowered point of view. So how do you see that we are at the moment? What do you see as you've been watching these last 6 decades, you know, world changing? What are you seeing now for us?
Well, you know, sometimes I ask myself, did I really sign up for this? Because it's getting to be such crunch time. And as you were talking about that South American experience with the children in the playground, there's a beautiful Hawaiian movie called Poisoning Paradise, because we're out here in the middle of the Pacific, you know, all these seed development companies have been out here because when they spray, it disperses over the ocean. But before it does, it disperses over our children, and the school kids are getting leukemia and all that. So we had a beautiful people's movement against this, and they actually managed to get some legislation passed, and then our top politicians vetoed it, and they were bought off like everywhere. So the beauty of this bad time is the transparency that we are seeing more and more. You know, it started with Enron, and then the Catholic Church, and all of our dirty laundry started to, you know, be shown in public. And so that's very important. And also part of my optimism derives from the fact that the planet is more powerful than we are, and that all of these designs and things for taking over the world, what I call the last gasp of the empire building era, you know, patriarchal empire building is now in a race between Western corporations and China, who's going to control the world. And I believe that our planet will wash away all their best laid plans. So I don't want to be lacking in compassion for the suffering that this will cause, but the suffering is already here. African children right now are dying because their parents aren't allowed to open the markets in which they can sell their meager veggies to buy other food and milk for the children. You know, because of the COVID crisis, they're prevented. That's what I think Melinda Gates was recognizing, that they didn't think about the economic consequences. And I hope that she and her husband will think about why it's not a cool idea to supply all the little African farmers now with Roundup resistant seeds and Roundup, toxic seeds and toxic chemicals as a solution to global hunger. So we're waking up. The transparency is here. And we're recognizing those of us who do go off and grow their own healthy food and who recognize the indigenous relationship with the plant world of food and medicine, the spiritual relationship. I remember being with a medicine priest in the Amazon when I asked him whether it didn't bother him the way that the Western scientists were coming down and taking their Amazon plants up north to make medicines out of them. And he said, oh, not to worry. This is through a translator. He couldn't speak English, but he said the spirits of the plants will not go with them, so they will not heal the way they do for us. And I tried to interpret that into my Western science language. And what it meant was we were going to analyze that plant, decide which molecule in it was the one that was causing the healing or whatever, and make gazillion copies of it and throw out the rest of the plant, right? So
lower end of the keyboard.
All, the two big stages in changes in medicine in the modern world, where one was 100 years ago when the great Rockefeller oil tycoon bribed all the medical schools across America to move to drug-based, largely oil-based drugs, medicine, and took away all of the indigenous healing, the naturopaths, the Ayurvedics, the Chinese medicine, the herbal medicines, all of those things were taken away. And now we have the second new wave where for the first time in history, we're finding diseases in people with no symptoms. And this is going to change medicine permanently from now on. This is the first time, I try to think back to when I was a child and the polio epidemic was rampant. What if they had tested for the polio virus in all of us who had no symptoms? I'll bet you I carried it. I'll bet you all my classmates did, because a couple of them ended up crippled. And the only ones who actually got the symptoms, had the disease, and did not get paralyzed were the ones who were lucky enough to get the hands-on massage Sister Kenny treatment, which was a nurse in Poughkeepsie in the Hudson Valley where I lived, who massaged kids through it rather than putting them in iron lungs, and they did not end up crippled. So here we are, from iron lung to respirator, and now with testing for diseases. This disease is everywhere now. I mean, this virus is everywhere. We know that we have coronaviruses built into our DNA already. We have learned to live with coronaviruses already. This is a new strain. We have to adapt to this one, but I hope it doesn't take us 30 years to recognize that viruses are just as essential to us, that all our cells, 50 trillion cells, are in manufacturing and spitting out viruses and trading them around in the fluids between the cells 24/7. So we don't understand the micro world, and making genocidal war on it is just shooting ourselves in the foot. So all of these things are coming to light now. And although they're trying very hard to squelch any questions about this new system, the information is getting out. And more doctors are saying, wait a minute, I'm healing my COVID patients with very inexpensive drugs, or we can all do a lot to prevent it just by taking lots of vitamin D. And of course, eating healthy food. So, the truth will out, Caroline. It's, we can't contain the understanding. We can't contain the spirit in ourselves. We can't lock it away. And so even if the human population is decimated in numbers, every one of us can start understanding, living right, fighting for the best things, and healthy food is the least controversial thing in this whole situation that really is unassailable as a crusade. So I think that's the best one for us to work on.
Yeah, yeah. And COVID or no COVID.
Yes, and having that spiritual relationship with your food, when you grow it, you get that, right?
Yeah, yeah, really. And everything then becomes so sacred in a sense. So life becomes sacred, and you become, I did a small 2-minute video piece this week about being awed, you know, about how often are we awed or wonderstruck. And it reminds me of my question to you as a child, because I think when we grow our own food, or the garden, I have a friend here who lives in a small apartment, but every summer does her big kind of gorgeous gardening, you know, and has transformed her world, and the wonderment. And I see you as someone who breathes wonderment, and I think it makes for a healthy body, mind, and spirit. This awe, being in awe on a regular basis, because I think you breathe in the whole universe and you become part of it. And so one of the things that I think I would ask you for, as we're going to finish, we finish our formal session, and then we invite everybody up into the room so that everyone gets to hang out with you too. But I want to hark back then to this guided life. And in fact, one of our very first guests, this is what we talked about a little bit. And we had some guests recently. I want to organize to send you a book called Sand Talk by one of our Indigenous leaders, intellectual, amazing piece of work, Sand Talk, and about the interconnectedness of all things. He and his beautiful wife, Megan, and they're working like with ancient wisdom and contemporary living, and trying to, you know, live both of those together. It's a wonderful thing. You will love it. I will make a note to send it to you. And so when you talk about being guided by spirit, because your life is, if I look at your curriculum, I know they're kind of dot points on a way, but there's so much more richness. How have you engaged with life and engaged with spirit, or a bigger sense of life in that conversation of life during your 85 years on this planet to bring you to where you are today?
Well, every time you talk, I think of so many things. One thing, by the way, going back to my childhood, food in my childhood was there was very little money involved. My father had a panel truck, and my mother grew lots of veggies, and we loaded my mom's extra veggies into the truck, and then we drove around from farm to farm. One farm had a cow just for us, so we got the milk from it, and my brothers and I would race to see who could shake it the cream in a jar fast, get butter fastest. And then we'd go to the fruit farm where honey and an apple cider press and the plums and peaches and all that stuff was. And then we'd go to the chicken and egg farm, and by the time we got home, we had all the week's food, and we had just gifted ours and they gifted back, and that's how we operated. This is during the war when food was rationed, and there was no lack because everyone was taking care of each other. As for my growing up, and where did the kind of spiritual opening, expansion from a trained Western scientist come, at the end of my postdoctoral fellowship at the Museum of Natural History in New York, I just broke free. It was like the science had become a chrysalis that I was ready to break out of. And so I just dove into the esoteric world and read everything from Madame Blavatsky to Findhorn to, that I could get my hands on. And got very interested in reincarnation, met a psychic reader who to this day is the best one I ever ran into, who did, I got a past life reading with her because it was like the price of a concert ticket or something. Hey, somebody was going to give me a story about me. I went in very skeptical. And she was so on target about so many things and convinced me that I'd had past lives. And it just made such sense right away. So I ended up teaching workshops, and I went through a past life regression with a friend, and then went on to teach it to other people to get the experience of other people's past lives. And it just went on from there, and eventually it morphed into this keyboard metaphor of who we are, and the spirit voice just, I don't know, it comes to me just on occasion, and usually the loud and clear, simple messages that appear as sentences I hear, or 3 words, go to Hawaii. And I know right away it means not for another visit, it means move. Or Washington, I'm in Sufi camp in Colorado or somewhere in a pup tent with summer clothes, and I'm told, go to Washington, D.C. I said, what? Last place I would have volunteered for. But again, everything happened in time on time, not a moment sooner or later, and paved the way. So I ended up in Washington, D.C. And that's how it just keeps going. And now I'm in Hawaii, and people say, do you plan to move? And I say, unless instructed otherwise, I'm here.
And Elisabet, do you have a meditation practice or that you do, or is it just being in life?
I'm a great advocate of rocking chairs for meditation tool. And I got that from my guru, J. Allen Boone, who wrote the wonderful books starting with Kinship with All Life, where he learned communion in nature from the first Hollywood movie star dog, whose name was, oh my goodness, before Rin Tin Tin, before Lassie. I have his picture on my wall, and I don't know why I'm blocking, but anyway, the point is that I got very into the difference between communication through language and communion through direct information transmission with, so you can commune with trees, children do it naturally, with animals, with all of nature, with yourself inside. And in a rocking chair, again, the concept of vibrations, Boone said, the universe is all vibrations, you just rock yourself. And my rocking chair exactly rocks to my 60 per minute heartbeat, if I just rock it a little bit. And that's a perfect way for me to get into meditation. And sometimes I move right into sleep in that chair, and otherwise I never fall asleep sitting up.
Yeah.
I'm actually taking a dream course right now for getting more aware in my dreams, which I think is a very important way for us to have contact with our inner lives.
Yeah, beautiful.
I have talk all day, so let's let other people in.
I wanted to close with something, but let's close now, and we can start to bring people up into the room with us. So thank you. I really could talk all day. I'll have to call you back on the Skype another day just for chatting.
Can I ask a quick question of Elisabet, because you are Professor of Opportunity at the university, and we've recently done events called the Nelson Mandela Youth Leadership Summit, and we literally had hundreds of children and teachers and the like. And so when you're talking, and in Australia, there's often a very bleak view of climate. It's we're all ruined, and there's this paralysis. So when you're talking to the young and the old about the opportunities of climate, what are the things you, I mean, I've obviously watched the videos, but to share with the rest of the people here, what do you share as the opportunities for people?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's good to get people over the fear or the concept that this is somehow the planet's vengeance against us, to recognize that Earth has been through both ice ages and hot ages. She's been through snowball Earth stages where ice almost entirely covered the planet, and she's been through, you know, ice-free stages and stuff. And so it's a natural process, and we are her natural creatures. And life has never been wiped out because of major catastrophes. It's also very important to recognize that this is the first extinction, and the rate at which we're killing off species qualifies as a genuine, the sixth great extinction. This is the first one caused by an Earth species itself. So it really means we have to go inside and think about who we are and what is our relationship to each other and the planet. And isn't it wonderful that all this Black Lives Matter and these things, they're all coming out so that we're seeing that this is stupid to make any kind of war on nature or each other has to just go out overnight. And I say to young people, you know, just look at all the things you disapprove of that the older people are doing, and don't do them yourselves. It's that simple. You just refrain from doing the things that you disapprove of that has been done. And then you start living right on the planet, and you see that you can adapt even to hotter climates. Because even a hot Earth is only a few degrees hotter than what we consider normal, the way an ice age is only a few degrees colder overall than what we consider normal. So we've lived through a dozen ice ages, and I believe we can adapt to this hot age and figure out there will be parts of the planet where life may be quite benign. And so, no, don't build another beach house. That's silly, you know, go live up high on a cliff where the beach will come to you. Look at how you can get into community and feed yourselves when 13 of the largest cities, largest 20 cities of the world are at sea level, with their piers and airports at sea level. They can get wiped out at once overnight. The sea level will not go up 1 centimeter at a time in a nice predictable Western science curve. It will happen in leaps. So they can all get wiped out at once. So prepare for that. We know we have new technologies. We're working here on clean green waste processing back into biochar and natural fuels with no emissions. We know how to desalinate deep, clean ocean water very rapidly using solar energy. We're pioneering some of these things right here in Hawaii. We can build hydrogen dirigibles that are clean and can carry water to put out fires, can carry emergency food, you know, get with the new technologies. There are so many ways to move into the future, leaving behind the oil industries and all those things. And don't bang your head against a wall. There are, as Rumi says, 1,000,000 ways or 1,000 ways to kneel and kiss the earth. It means find something your own heart sings to, so that you will become an attractor to other. It doesn't matter whether you write poetry or grow veggies or campaign for politicians that will make things better. Whatever makes your heart sing, if you do that one and know that all the others are there doing the other things together, we play the whole keyboard together, and we can move on. We are, to begin with, eternal spirits, and that helps too, to lose your fear.
Elisabet, this is Peter, who saw you 34 years ago in Melbourne. So Peter, how's today and the evolution?
Oh, gee, thanks, Caroline. Elisabet, this you are such a joy. You really are. I've just had a smile on my face listening to your stories and the common sense and the connectedness that you convey. And that's what I remember from, it was back in the mid-'80s in Melbourne at a Future of Work Foundation event where you spoke about connectedness, and it just was so logical and so sensible, and I've followed your work ever since, and really appreciate what you've done with us today. But thanks again for the joy that you bring and the common sense and it's just the common sense, the way we can connect and move forward effectively. Thanks very much.
Thank you for that, Peter. You know, we so know what to do. We know what to do. It is common sense. And thank you for pointing that out. It's really not hard.
Yeah, there was one story that you told that I've recounted a few times, and that was about some work that you did with an indigenous community, I think it was in the Amazon, where you explained to these elders that in Western society we'd become so cute and thought we were so smart we could control nature, and commented on the way that they knew nature, they knew when to plant things, they knew how things evolved, and you pleaded, teach me, tell me, and the elder looked up at you aghast and said, listen, and that's effectively what you've conveyed.
It was actually a long-haired Amazon Indian, and I was saying, can you teach me to talk to the plants and animals? And he said, shut up and listen, Elisabet. They've been talking to each other as long as the forest has been around. Your job isn't to initiate a conversation, it's to hear what's going on.
They're good.
Yeah.
That's it. Listen.
Yeah.
The story that you have on the opening of your website, which I've heard in other places, but I think it speaks so much to what you just had shared with the listening, and that we're all doing our part that makes our heart sing, makes our spirit alive. But the story of the imaginal cells and the butterfly, can you just share that with us all here this morning?
Sure. It's a story I originally got from Nori Huddle with a beautiful children's book called Butterfly, in which he talks about the predatory caterpillar who eats hundreds of times its own weight, and eventually it just hangs itself up and in utter fatigue and bloated condition, and its skin hardens into a chrysalis. And then within the skin of the caterpillar, there are little, what I came to understand as stem cells that have been there all along in the caterpillar's body. But now, as the caterpillar begins to just melt down, the stem cells come forth and start multiplying, and in her children's book, holding hands with each other, becoming imaginal cells. And that is, by the way, a biological term, because the biological name for that forming butterfly is an imago, and that's where the word imaginal cells comes from, imaginal cells. So the metaphor is that we are all imaginal cells linking up into this being that emerges to live lightly on the earth after that predatory caterpillar phase is over. And so it makes a wonderful metaphor that says, no, it's not like everything burns up and then the phoenix rises from the ashes. It's that the imaginal cells are at work building the butterfly while the caterpillar is still dissolving. And that's what makes it such a good metaphor for us to recognize that what we are doing is building a butterfly. So don't waste so much energy on being angry with the caterpillar. He's done, he's over, and he knows it. And that's why he's being so desperate about trying to survive, trying to hang on to this last wave of empire where I'm in charge, and doesn't want to let go. But we can let go of him. We can let go of that caterpillar image and move into the caring and sharing, living lightly on the earth butterfly world.
This is a really interesting thing, isn't it? That as soon as you have energy of fight or resistance against that which you don't like, you're still engaged and sustaining it with your own energy and not creating what you really would love to be living. So, and it's a really challenging one, isn't it? Because it takes a lot less creativity to criticize than it does to create. And yet the most flourishing, regenerative state is to be in your own true creative self. But it's a work, a discipline of mind.
Yeah, I belong to a group of people called evolutionary leaders who just published a book called Our Moment of Choice. And I asked to write not one of the chapters, but the afterword to the book. And I wrote it as a letter to my 5th great grandchild, still a baby, as I wrote this letter. And so it's called Letter to the Future. And in it, I recount another of the great pieces of advice I got through a poem that a Bengali poet wrote to me when I was living in Canada and beating my head against the wall over children being napalmed in the Vietnam War, things of that kind. And the line in the poem that I could never forget was, "Somewhere the tears and the agony are stored into the chest of thunder." Somewhere the tears and the agony are stored into the chest of thunder. And he was saying to me, energy is energy. Transmute that energy of agony and anger into some kind of thunderous positive activity. So recognize that anger is not a bad emotion. It's a healthy response to things you see that make the natural world and each other suffer. It's a natural response, but take that anger energy and transmute it into some kind of positive energy, into a song or a poem or a garden, and let dig out the earth, get rid of that, put that energy into growing new food or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an extraordinary thing that we can talk about all of the really, some people would call them evil things that are happening in the world, and leave everybody feeling inspired and optimistic. And that is your extraordinary gift, Elisabet, the who you are and the being available for something bigger to speak through you and be through you. So thank you so, so much for accepting to be with us today.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lots of love to you all. Aloha, aloha, aloha.
Very good. Very well done.
Elisabet, once again, aloha. And bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Very much. Thank you, Caroline.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode of The Optimist Heart as much as we did. Quite inspired, and our hearts are full. We'd love to have you involved, joining us on a weekly basis at The Optimist Heart and joining the Centre for Optimism to share what makes you optimistic and to become more infectiously optimistic yourself. Have a great day.